So in this clip, or in this video, we're going to talk real quick about some evidence for evolution. Obviously, we've been talking a lot about natural selection and how it plays into different traits being evolved, but I want to kind of give us some background into why we have determined evolution to be something that happened. And the first piece of evidence the evidence we have is very broad. We have a lot of different things that we can relate to that kind of prove prove the support for evolutions. We have the fossil record, we have chemical similarities, anatomical similarities, genetic or universal genetic code, geographic distribution, and embryological similarities. So going through, the first one is the fossil record. The fossil record gives us a lot of insight into what organisms lived many, many years ago. So if you've ever seen fossils of dinosaurs, if you've ever seen Jurassic Park and the mosquitoes in amber, fossils give us a lot of ideas of what was once living. And so what we can do is we can figure out how these species were related to the ones that exist now. For example, we have Eohippus. Eohippus was a very small, kind of horse-like creature. And over time, they evolved. So different traits, different adaptations were needed that caused them to develop into the horses that we know today. So Eohippus evolved into Mesohippus. You can see changes in skull, changes in the size of the foot. They got much taller and much longer legs. Meryhippus had even longer legs, and again, that more horse-like appearance. And those then evolved into the Equus, or the horses that we know today. So their legs have been changed from these small toe-like feet over time to the hoofs that we know today. The second one, chemical similarities, talks a lot about what we've already talked about in science already. So all organisms pass on genetic information as DNA. We've talked about this in the beginning of the year with our 7 characteristics of life. All organisms have DNA, and that DNA codes for different proteins and different proteins and different chemicals within our bodies. And all living things are made up of cells, which means they all need ATP for energy, or adenosine triphosphate. That ATP we looked at back when we talked about bioenergetics. How do we get our energy, and how do we do work as organisms? All cells need ATP. You can't use any other source for energy, so you have to rely on the one that works, ATP. The third one, anatomical similarities. There's a lot of anatomical similarities that we've found, but this is differences in skeletal structure. So different species have similar skeletal structures. For example, we have humans, cats, whales, and bats over here. Each one, despite having different lineages, or being different species, each one has humerus, ulna, carpal, metacarpal, phalanges, and they all have 5 digits. They all have 5 fingers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on a human. Cats have 5 fingers. Whales, they don't even have hands, but they still have 5 fingers. And bats have wings, but they still have 5 digits. So this trait not only shows how this is diversified over time. So whales obviously swim, so they are more likely to need flippers. Bats fly, so they need wings rather than fingers like us. But you can see that at some point, there was a common ancestor between all of these individuals that decided 5 fingers work best. Humans, obviously, we use it because of our opposable thumbs. We can use tools a lot better. But there had to have been some common ancestor between all of these that had 5 digits that found that the mutation that it was given for 5 fingers worked the best. So this relates into both analogous and homologous structures. Homologous structures, homo is same, so same structures from a common ancestry. So that pentadactyl limbs, so like I just talked about, the 5 fingers, even though we have different species, each one has the same kind of lineage. They're all related back to a common ancestor. Analogous structures, on the other hand, are based on evolution or on environment. So we have sharks, we have penguins, and we have dolphins. Sharks are fish, penguins are birds, dolphins are mammals. All three of them, though, have developed this kind of fin shape that they use to move very quickly through the water. So this is analogous structures. These have been, even though they weren't developed from the same ancestry, they all developed traits based on their environment. So this relates a lot back to when we talked about nature versus nurture. Nurture would be the analogous structures because it's based on their environment. Homologous structures would be nature because over time these genes have been passed down that develop into 5 fingers or 5 digits. So this shows just how different nature versus nurture can be if you try to isolate them into examples. So we have nature over here, and we have nurture over here. You can also see this in vestigial structures. Vestigial structures are structures that were once needed but fell into disuse and de-evolution. So in salamanders, you can see these feet. Obviously, they need feet to walk around. Whales, on the other hand, whales don't have feet. Neither do boa constrictors. But you see they have these small bones. These bones were once feet in a previous ancestry. So whales actually are very closely related to hippos in terms of ancestry because whales, after the Precambrian area, once organisms started to move onto land, whales came onto land. They were actually tetrapods. They walked the earth. And at some point during their ancestry, they decided that they wanted to move back into the water. And hippos are very good swimmers. Even despite their size, they're very good swimmers. But these whales over time lost the ability to walk. However, we can see that they have lost this ability because of these vestigial structures. Same thing, you usually see lizards, you'll see tortoises, you'll see geckos. All of those have limbs, but boa constrictors or snakes don't. And that's because these snakes have lost the ability to walk. They found that it was better if they just slide around on their stomachs. And this is where their vestigial legs are still present but not used. The next evidence that we have is in our universal genetic codes. We said that back during DNA synthesis and back during mitosis and meiosis, we said that all living things contain DNA. They all have the same 4 nucleotides: adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. And in order to use this, we all have to have kind of the same mechanisms to translate and transcribe it. We all have to use the same enzymes to turn it from from DNA into protein. We have to have the same mechanisms to code from DNA to RNA, to code so that we can remake DNA. So all living things have to have come from some organism that first developed this back millions and millions of years ago, before the fish, before the dinosaurs, before humans, before all other organisms, the single-celled organism, the bacteria. So bacteria at some point had to have developed this method, and it was passed down from prokaryotes to eukaryotes, and then as eukaryotes became more developed and more multicellular, those same mechanisms were retained. And in reality, we can see that this is going to cause a lot of similarity. So for example, humans and cats, there is a genetic similarity of about 90%. Chimpanzees are typically the one that we think is the closest in similarity. They are 96%. But even fruit flies, we have a 61% similarity in terms of our genes, in terms of the coding that produces the proteins that we need to survive, the enzymes that we need to survive, the structural material that we need to survive. Even though we don't look anything alike. There is a lot of similarity between the DNA of one organism and another. Same thing, humans share 50% of their DNA with bananas, just because of how our DNA codes for different things in our bodies. All of the different nucleotides working together create the same molecules that we need in humans that bananas need. Now, not all of them. I will say there's about 50% difference, but there's still a lot of similarity, even between us as humans and something that we typically don't even think of as living, as plants. So the next one is biographic distribution. So biogeography is the study of the distribution of living things and the factors that affect their distribution. So next unit we're going to be talking a lot about biotic and abiotic factors. So this studies species distribution and how different environments can affect what types of characteristics you see and what types of organisms you see. So this can usually be best followed with the idea of plate tectonics. So over time, we had multiple supercontinents over the course of Earth's life. The last one was a continent called Pangaea. And as these continents spread apart, the organisms that lived on them were separated. But we usually find that even so, we get a lot of convergent evolution. So for example, you see the giant armadillo in North America versus the giant anteater of South America. Both of them have that kind of humped shape with the long nose and the claws. If you jump over to Africa and to Oceania, to Australia, you find the same thing. In Africa and Asia, we get the giant pangolin, again, long snout and claws. And in Australia, we have the spiny anteater, long nose and claws. So even as small as continents can have distribution of different species. For example, these are all postmen or long-winged butterflies. And you can see that even despite how closely related they are, there's a lot of diversity just in the northern part of South America. The next one is embryological similarities. Embryos are kind of the starting development after eggs are formed, or eggs are fertilized. So to start out, take a moment, look through these embryos. Do you think you could figure out what type of organisms they are? What about now? So it might be a little easier now, but there's still a lot of them that look very, very similar. How about now? So you can see that even though we end up diversifying into fish, salamanders, tortoises, chicks, hogs, calves, rabbits, humans, we all start out looking very similar. And this again hints to common ancestry, common characteristics that were inherited over time. So as organisms got more developed, it was found that keeping this embryonic stage at the beginning was much more beneficial to the development of the organism. That's just how our DNA played out with development. So you can see that over the course of time, even as we got more complex from fish to humans, not that we evolved specifically through all of these, but as we got more complex as organisms, our embryos stayed the same. Congrats! So that's where I'm going to end this video. We will have some discussion about it on Monday before we jump into phylogenetic trees and kind of tracking our ancestry. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me.